Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, wherever you're joining us today in today's live presentation coming to you from Colombo Wisdom University. Today's date is Eke Market Day in the Igbo lunar calendar, and it's 4/26 in the Roman Catholic calendar. Remember that at Colombo we always advise you to use a naturally given common sense, which we call Akonuche in the Igbo language. And because we are Igbo-centric, Biafran-centric, and African-centric, we always advise you to see things from how it concerns you and stop seeing things from how it's concerning other cultures, because every culture protects their own. Therefore, we have to protect the Igbo race, we have to protect Biafra, we have to protect African people, because we are one people, you know. So the title of today's presentation is that 60% of slaves brought to West Virginia are Igbos. 60% of slaves brought to West Virginia are Igbos. And there you see Igbo culture, Igbo resistance, and we cannot give up uniting our people and getting our freedom. Because right now we're not free. It is very, very important. So we're going to be going through a video, and I'll be analyzing that video, to show you that that 60% of the slaves brought from the Bight of Biafra to West Virginia in America, that 60% of them contain Igbo DNA, Igbo blood. So let's go to that video in order to appreciate this lecture.
Years of forgotten paperwork, there's a number that historians do not like to say out loud: 60%. That is the estimated share of Black Americans who carry at least one Igbo ancestor. Not African ancestor, not West African ancestor, one specific people from one specific river delta in what is now southeastern Nigeria.
And that 60% of Black Americans carry Igbo blood. We at Nkoloma, we are not surprised that 60% of Black Americans carry Igbo blood, which means many of these Black Americans are our brothers and sisters. Yes, they are brothers and sisters. That's what he's saying. Let's listen to him.
Almost nobody has been told this, not in schools, not in textbooks, not even in most family trees. What you're about to hear is not a story about Africa. It is a story about America, and about a people whose bloodline became the hidden architecture of an entire nation's identity. For centuries, the story of the transatlantic slave trade has been told as one undifferentiated tragedy. Millions of people, stripped of names, stripped of nations, stripped of anything.
Remember, they cannot teach you these things in schools. They cannot write it for you in books for you to read. You can just be getting this type of information from independent sources, from sources outside, their curriculum. That is why it is important you subscribe to Nkoloma Wisdom University, because we package and present lectures that is very important to you, that you do not get from any other source. So let's continue to this. You cannot see this thing in their school. They cannot teach you this thing in their school or in their curriculum or write it for you to know. This is the secret. This is true because they've been hiding it. The slave owners, the ship owners, those who did this, they've been hiding it for years. When you ask a Black American, he will tell you he's from Nigeria. He will not tell you he's from an Igbo. And now it is clear that 60% of them are Igbo. It is mind-boggling. Let's continue to listen.
That could be traced back. That is the version most of us grew up with. A void, a blank space where identity used to be. But that version is wrong, and it has been wrong for a long time. Because buried inside shipping manifests, plantation ledgers, court records, and now inside 21st century DNA databases is a pattern too consistent to be a coincidence. One ethnic group did not simply disappear into the anonymous mass of African. One ethnic group left fingerprints so deep that they reshaped the culture, the language, and even the bloodstream of an entire country. That group was the Igbo. And what happened to them, and because of them, is one of the most undertold chapters in American history. Here is where it gets uncomfortable. Historians who study the Bight of Biafra, the West African coastal region that includes what is now southeastern Nigeria, have pieced together a staggering figure. Of the 1.7 million people forced out of that region during the entire era of the Atlantic slave trade, roughly 1.3 million of them were Igbo. Read that again.
Out of 1.7 million people that was brought from Bight of Biafra, 1.3 million of them are Igbos. And we want to remind you that before the arrival of the white people, of the Europeans to Africa, that the Igbo had a great civilization. According to Wikipedia, Igbo culture, Omenana Ndi Igbo, also called Ordinana Ndi Igbo, are the customs and practices and traditions of the Igbo people of southeastern Nigeria. It consists of ancient practices known as Omenana, Ordinana, as well as new concepts added into the Igbo culture, either by cultural evolution or by outside influences. These customs and traditions include people's visual arts, music, dance forms, attire, food, cuisine, and language dialects. Because of their various subgroups, the variety of their cultures is heightened further. You know that your culture is the totality of your way of life. You know, the way your art, the way you draw something, the way you dress, your music, the way you dance, the food you eat, the language you speak, the things that you do. This is your culture. We have great culture before the arrival of these colonial masters into our land, you know, and our people were enjoying themselves, you know. And also, in Igbo, originally known as Igbo, was the capital of the kingdom of Unre, beginning in the 8th or 9th century. The town, Igbo town, was formerly the capital of Kingdom of Unre, beginning in the 8th or 9th century CE. It was the center of an extensive trade system linking town with Gao on the Niger bend and through there to Egypt and North Africa. So Ibuhu was the capital of Unre Kingdom, you know, Unre Kingdom. And they were trading with Gao, trading with Egypt, trading with North Africa. It was a prominent center of lost wax casting, where they cast, wax bronze, one of the earliest in Africa. Our people cast wax and cast bronze in those days. You know, we have great culture, we have great civilization, you know, and Ibuhu is notable for 3 archaeological sites where excavations have found bronze artifacts from a highly sophisticated bronze metal working culture dating to the 9th century AD, centuries before known bronzes of the region. So Ibufu have been into bronze casting business, bronze making artifacts. Center of civilization, was the capital of Unre Kingdom. People was well organized before the arrival of this colonial master, before the arrival of these European colonial masters in our land. We are very well organized. We have our democratic system. And also don't forget the Nsude Pyramid. The Nsude Pyramid shrines are a collection of 10 ancient stepped pyramids built from hardened red mud and clay by the Igbo people in the village of Nsude, located in Udi, highlands of Enugu State, southeastern Nigeria. The Igbos were building pyramids in those days. Pyramids, they know how to build pyramids. the exact construction period of Nsude pyramid shrines remain unknown. The time that these pyramids were built was unknown. This was long time ago, far back. Because Igbos was created, came to this world when living things, started in this world. The Igbos are one of the oldest civilizations. We are one of the oldest people on earth, So this Nsude pyramid, this waxing up and casting of bronzes in Ibuhu have been there, ancient. We have a great civilization. This is just to let you know that Igbos have great civilization before the arrival of the colonial masters. That's all we are trying to let you know by citing Nsugbe pyramids, citing for you the Ibuhu, metal and bronze casting artifacts, and also the culture of Igbo people. It's been there. We have been living our life before they came. Okay, that's what we want to establish here. Before the Europeans came. And why did the Europeans came? Through a papal bull. What is a papal bull? A papal bull is a type of public decree. Papal bull is a decree by the Catholic Church. That's how the Catholic Church was governing Europe then, So they do issue like decrees, like authoritative letters, authoritative rules, authoritative decrees, letters, patent charter, which is always issued by the Pope of the Catholic Church. So once it is issued, you are bound to comply with it because they are the one ruling Europe then. They are the one ruling the world then. That is papal bull. Papal bull is a type of public decree, letters, patent, or charter issued by Pope of the Catholic Church. Okay, so that is how it is done. It is named after the leaden seal bulla, traditionally appended to authenticate it. There's a bull that they put on that thing, and that seal, to make it authentic, to show that it's from the Catholic Church, it's from the Pope. Okay, and the papal bull that started this slavery was issued by Pope Alexander VI on May 4th, 1993, which granted the Catholic monarchs of King Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabella I of Castile all lands to the west. That is, the papal bull was issued on May 4th, 1493 in the 15th century, which granted Alfonso of Portugal, rights over all the lands to the west and south of a pole to pole in the 100 leagues west and south of any of the islands of the. They know how they're divided, but the point is they issued the Pope Alexander VI issued a papal bull to Portugal, to go and take lands, kill people, take lands of those who are not worshiping Christ in the 15th century. That was how the slavery started. That's what we want you to know, how the slavery started, So that was how it started. And the slavery lasted from, let's say, from 1400, from the 15th century to 1888, because the last country to stop slavery was Brazil. So it lasted from 1400 to 1888 for 488 years. That is when slavery lasted, when Europeans were coming to Africa, buying human beings, going around the world, not only Africa, but mainly in Africa, buying people, buying human beings and bringing them to their land, to their plantations, to their, to their own country to work for them. And they are saying in this presentation that we are listening to that 60% of those brought from the Bight of Biafra are Igbos. 60% of Black Americans are Igbos. 60% of those brought to Western Virginia are Igbos. That out of 1.7 million people brought from the Bight of Biafra, 1.3 million of them are Igbos. This is mind-boggling. That is why we are bringing it to you. So let's, now that we have established this fast here, Now let us continue to listen to him.
Not a minority within a larger group, the overwhelming majority. This was not a scattering of individuals swept up alongside other ethnicities. This was a targeted, sustained generational extraction of one people, funneled through specific ports, Calabar, Bonny, the Niger Delta, and loaded onto ships bound overwhelmingly for one destination above all others, the American colony of Virginia. And this is where the story stops being about Africa and starts being about America.
He said, generational extraction of one people. Generational, generation means a generation is 100 years or a century. It's a generational extraction of one people. Who are those people? The Igbos. That is why we in Kolombo Hard Wisdom University is letting you as an Igbo that you were enslaved, you were colonized, you were neo-colonized right now. You don't have a base. You don't have your own country. You have suffered everything that is sufferable in this world. And yet, in this 21st century, you are still being misguided. That's what we want you to know. The Igbo man has suffered so much in this world, and yet we are not yet free. Let's continue to listen to him.
Because Virginia did not receive a random cross-section of enslaved Africans. Virginia became, in the words of historians who have spent their careers on this exact question, something close to an extension of Igbo land itself. Of the roughly 37,000 Africans recorded arriving in Virginia from the Calabar region during the 1700s, an estimated 30,000 of them were Igbo. Some researchers place the share of Biafran captives among all people trafficked into Virginia at somewhere between 30 and 45%, and of those, as many as 80%.
So many Igbo people were brought into West Virginia in the United States. Out of 37,000 slaves brought in from Bight of Biafra, out of 37,000, 30,000 are Igbos, which made many of the slaves in West Virginia to be like an Igbo country. And today, there's an Igbo farm village in Staunton. There's an Igbo farm village in Staunton, Virginia, also known as the 1700 West African Farm Exhibit. This farm has been there since 1700. Recognizes the contribution of the Igbo slave to the development of Virginia. There's a farm exhibit, the farm that they built as an exhibit to show the contributions of Igbo slaves to the development of Virginia and the greater United States culture. That because so many people were brought in from, so many Igbos were brought in from Bight of Biafra into West Virginia. As they were being brought into West Virginia, they are selling them to other parts of the United States. So that farm is just to show how the Igbo man have contributed to the development of West Virginia and the United States as a whole. Because 60% of slaves in America today are Igbos. That's what the report is showing. And then like we are saying, there's an Igbo farm village in Staunton, Virginia, also known as the 1700 West African Farm Exhibit. The West African Farm Exhibit is a farm that was built to show the contributions of Igbos of the slave trade to the development of Virginia and the greater United States culture. Igbo Farm Village was formed by freed Igbo slaves in Staunton. This Igbo Farm Village was formed by freed Igbo slaves in Staunton, Virginia, United States. A little bit of history about the farm village. Former US President Sir James Madison owned a big plantation where he had over 600 slaves working for him. former U.S. President Sir James Madison had owned a big plantation where he had over 600 slaves working for him. Even the President of the United States have a big plantation where he has 600 slaves working for him, and many of them are Igbo people. I remember not only the president, all the churches benefited from slavery, but the Catholic Church was the chief beneficiary. All the churches, Anglican Church, Pentecostal, any one of them, all of them traded human beings. All of them bought and sold human beings to make money. They all benefited from slavery. We want you to know that. And James Madison, which is former U.S. president, also owned a big plantation and had over 600 slaves working for him. The Mbuli cheese, they said the Mbuli cheese, you know, the Igbos used to have marks, a lot of marks before. Mbuchi. Ndị Igbo na-egbuchi. Now marks anyị na-enwe n'iru anyị. They are called the Mbuli cheese. Igbos with itchy marks from Onre. Resisted being slaves and rebelled against working on the farm. That's many Igbos who have itchy, who have marks on their faces, which is Ibuchi, which is, they call it Mbilichi, which is itchy marks. They resisted being slaves and rebelled against working on the farm. For you to know that the Igbo resistance did not start today. They resisted. They refused to work on the farm. They were repeatedly chastised and abused. This is what they are doing to you. Remember, the slaves in those days, they were chained. Some of them, they use iron to mark them number on their body. They are subjected to different types of treatments. We want you to know that. And here they are saying they were repeatedly chastised and abused. The slaves, you the Igbo, this is what has happened to you. However, the Mbilichis found a herb and concocted a syrup which they used to poison the owner, Sir Madison. That former US president, the Igbo slave, they concocted a poison and poisoned him. That singular act of those warriors freed over 600 slaves working there, and all in Virginia and part of West Virginia, that because they poisoned the former US President Madison, they poisoned him. That action led to all the slaves working for him, about 600, and other slaves in Virginia and West Virginia got their freedom because of that. Because the slave owners became afraid of owning them as slaves. The Igbo people are very, very brave people. We are very, very, very brave. Why are we behaving as if we are cowards in the 21st century? We are bravery people. We resisted slavery. We resisted it. See what they're saying. And we even poisoned the owner of that slave, of that plantation. And that gave a lot of us freedom. These are the things we want you to know. That the resistance that you are seeing, hearing, is inbuilt in us. We don't want to be slaves. We don't want anybody to enslave us. You know? So that singular act of poisoning the owner, Sir Madison, freed over 600 slaves working in his big farm and in all Virginia and part of West Virginia and South Carolina, etc. So many slave owners rejected them because of the singular act of poisoning the ex-president, the former US president, Madison, who was enslaving them. The farm was formally established in honor of those warriors, the warriors who resisted slavery, the warriors who poisoned Madison. The descendants of those slaves continue to live there and still retain Igbo language in West Virginia. They still retain Igbo language and their culture in Igbo in West Virginia. Do you know that as an Igbo living in Europe, living in America? Do you know that? That's why you should join us at Nkola Mahadum Wisdom University. Please, if you like what you are hearing in this lecture, like, comment, and share. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel. And continuing, the Igbos, they have markets. They grow crops like okra, akede, cocoyam. The farm was officially consecrated by Ezenre Obidiegwu Onyeso Nri Enwelana 2 in September 2009. The farm was officially consecrated by Ezenre Obidiegwu Onyeso Nri Enwelana 2 in September 2009. Ezenre came from Nigeria in 2009 to consecrate the farm, to recognize the farm, to commission the farm. That farm built in honor of Igbo slave warriors in Virginia. This year also, lots of rituals were performed to pacify the spirits of slaves that died and to make peace with their spirits. Ofo, Nzu, Ogilishi, etc. were used to perform the rituals. This is in West Virginia. There's a farm in West Virginia that I'm describing to you. You can visit that farm to see things for yourself. The farm that was built in honor of Igbo slaves in West Virginia. Having explained this to you, let us continue to listen to what we are listening to.
We're Igbo. In parts of the 18th century, Igbo people made up more than 30% of the entire enslaved population of the Virginia Tidewater. Some historians have gone so far as to nickname colonial Virginia Igbo land, not as poetry, as a demographic fact. Think about what that actually means. It means that when we talk about the founding of American slave society, the Chesapeake, the tobacco economy, the plantation culture that would go on to define the antebellum South, we're not talking about a generic African import. We are talking, in large part, about the forced transplantation of one specific West African civilization onto American soil in numbers large enough to shape the culture from the ground up. Historian Douglas Chambers, who spent years reconstructing this history, described what happened in Virginia as a process of Igboization, the slow, forced, and largely unacknowledged transformation of early African-American culture into something built on Igbo foundations. That is not a footnote. That is a rewriting of the origin story of Black America. But
what happened in West Virginia is an Igboization. It's an Igboization because most of the slaves brought from the Bight of Biafra, from the coastland of Biafra land, from the coastland of West Africa, more than 60% of them are Igbos. And then brought to West Virginia. It's like any Black person you see in West Virginia is an Igbo in those days. And as they are landing in West Virginia, other slave traders are coming from all over America and Canada to buy them. You know? So it's like Igboization. Igbos everywhere in West Virginia. This is interesting. Let's continue to listen to him.
Here's where it gets worse, or depending on how you look at it, more remarkable. This wasn't a one-time historical accident that faded out. The concentration was so deep and so sustained across generations that its effects rippled forward for centuries. Chambers, after years of archival work, arrived at an estimate that should stop anyone in their tracks. He suggested that perhaps 60% of Black Americans today have at least one Igbo ancestor. Sit with that number, 60%. In a country where the popular narrative has always been that African American ancestry is an unrecoverable blur, too many ships, too many ports, too many.
According to Chambers, the guy that worked on this discovery, he discovered that 60% of all Black Americans are Igbos. He didn't miss what to say. 60% of all Black Americans are Igbos. They are our brothers. Stop running away from them. Anybody making you to hate them or to dislike them is trying to divide you. They are our people. They are one of us. That's what we want you to know. It is very, very clear. Even when you look at them, for me, when I see them, I know them already. I tell them that they are Igbo. We should come together with our brothers. Let's continue to watch.
Many centuries of forced silence. One historian is arguing that the majority of Black Americans carry a direct, traceable line back to a single, specific West African people. That is not a blur. That is a signal cutting through 300 years of static. Funeral customs, spiritual practices, methods of resistance, even patterns of community organization among enslaved people in the Chesapeake. Researchers have traced threads of all of it back to Igbo cultural frameworks that never fully died, because there were simply too many Igbo people, packed too densely for their culture to be erased the way slaveholders intended. This is not chaos. This is structure. And once you understand,
there are so many Igbo people that were brought from Igbo land to America, to West Virginia. That is why our culture was dominant in that slave population that was brought in. There's no way you can prevent it. That is why they are saying here that today, that they still have places they grow okra. When you hear Americans saying okra, it's because of the Igbo language. The way we call it in our land, okra, akede. They grow okra, they grow akede, you know, and they grow cocoyam, ede, you know. So our culture become endemic, become, you know, erasable. That you cannot erase it. You cannot, you know, you cannot wipe it out. It becomes there. That's what he's saying, that our people brought so much to the land that we have a lot of Igbos, you know, in our land. And you know that these European ancestors, those who participated in these crimes of slavery and colonization, that even after the slave trade ended in 1888 in Brazil, they started colonization. They left their land to our land, you know, to colonize us. That is when they started to impose their language, impose their religion, impose the educational system, impose their banking system, impose everything that their culture on our people. From 1900 to 1960, when they start to give Africans, you know, flag independence. Flag independence without no economic independence. That's what they did. And soon after that, soon after Africans were given flag independence, they introduced neocolonialism. Today, we are practicing from flag independence to date to what you have now going on in Africa, which many people don't know, is neocolonialism. Neocolonialism is when they now place our people into positions and they are using our people to enslave us. That's what neocolonialism means. So when you see our people, our popes, our reverend fathers, our men of God, you know, using Western religion to, you know, to make sure that our people are following Western culture. That is neocolonialism. When you have a president of a country or a governor, you know, trying to, you know, force on our people Western culture, that is neocolonialism. When you speak your mother tongue, your African language or Igbo language and you're flogged in school, you are disciplined in school, it is neocolonialism, because they don't want you to practice your own. They want you to continually be following the foreign ones. So that is what we have going on today. That's why they are in control of our governments. Of course, we have told you that all the governmental structures we have are colonial structures. The government that we are presenting are foreign colonial model. Our people, our ancestors have Republican way of democracy. Republican democracy, where we select our leaders by not by vote, but by, by appointment. In Igbo Republican democracy, everybody have a voice. And if there's anything to be done, with more than one people in a community level, people will appoint delegates from each village or each family. That's how it is done. So, but now they are pushing this their foreign colonial, democracy on our people, which Africa doesn't need at this time. So let's continue to watch, the guy.
In the structure, you start to understand why the enslavers themselves treated Igbo captives so differently, with a mixture of demand and fear that shows up again and again in colonial records. Planters wanted Igbo labor because Biafran ports were brutally a cheap and steady supply line, but they also feared what they called Igbo rebelliousness, a reputation recorded again and again in plantation documents, for resistance, for a refusal to simply be broken. That reputation was not a myth invented by nervous slaveholders. It has a name, a date, and a location. And it is where this story turns from statistics into something.
They like the Igbo slaves because Igbo slaves were cheap to buy from the Bight of Biafra. And you will ask yourself, why are we so cheap? Why are we so cheap to buy? Why? And again, they like Igbo slaves because Igbo slaves work harder than any other slave. They even pay more to buy an Igbo slave because they know it will give them more profits. An Igbo slave will work much more harder to give the owner more money. So that's why they are buying Igbo slaves, But they said they fear their rebellion. They fear their resistance. And that resistance has continued to this day. Because if you know what is going on, almost 90% of Haitian people are Igbos. Almost 90% of Haitian people, Haiti, are Igbos. And they got their independence after United States. They were the second nation to get independence. But what happened? America and the Europeans don't like that. That's why you hear what is going on in Haiti today. You can sit down and be laughing. But they are our brothers. The Haitian people are our brothers. What you see going on in Haiti is resistance of the Igbos, resisting against foreign domination, resisting against foreign colonialism and neocolonialism. That is what is going on in Haiti today. And our brothers in America here are also doing their resistance. They're trying to, to survive here after they have been badly treated for many, many, many centuries. And remember the Ekumeku warriors who fought the British for many, many years, for more than 30 years, before they were finally defeated by the British or Britain. This is the form of resistance. Even the Biafran restoration project that is ongoing now is also resistance. Our fathers went to war to get Biafra so we can have our own country, so we can be free. So that rebellion, that resistance has been in us. It doesn't start today. So, and we wonder from Koloma and Wisdom University why the generation of today, the generation of Biafran Igbo people today in the 21st century, why are we behaving like women? Why can't we stand up and support this Biafran restoration project so that we can be free? Even South Africans, before they were colonized, they fought for 100 years. The South Africans, before they were defeated by Europeans, they fought for 100 years. That is resistance. And let's not add what is going on in the Middle East today. Iran and all people fighting against European, American domination. Those are resistance. So the Igbos have been resisting, has been rebellious, for decades, for centuries. And they are known for that. Okay? So we should unite with all our brothers in diaspora, whether you are in America, whether you are in Europe, whether you are in Asia, whether you are in Brazil. Try to unite yourself. Be in unity. Don't try to be divided. Because if we are in unity, that's the only time we can have our freedom from these colonial masters who have hold us down, hold us in bondage for centuries up to today. Let's continue to listen to him.
Something closer to legend. May 1803, Dunbar Creek, St. Simon's Island, Georgia. A group of Igbo captives, somewhere around 75 people newly purchased in Savannah, were being transported by ship to their final destination of enslavement. Something happened on that water that has echoed through Black American memory for over 2 centuries. The captives rose up. They overpowered the crew. 3 sailors were killed in the struggle. And then, according to the accounts passed down and later corroborated by historians, the Igbo captives who had seized the vessel made a choice that no slaveholder's ledger could ever process. Rather than submit to bondage, at least 10 of them walked into the water of Dunbar Creek, singing, and did not come back out. This is where you have to stop and really sit with what you're being told. This was not despair. Read the way it has survived in Gullah Geechee oral tradition, and you find something closer to defiance.
Igbo resistance was also demonstrated when some Igbo slaves were bought from Savannah, Georgia, and being transported to somewhere, to their destination. They rebelled against the owners. They rebelled. They killed the 3 slave owners on that boat. And they said, instead of them to get to where they will be enslaved, let them die. And the 10 of them dived into the water and died instead of going to be enslaved. That will tell you, when people are telling you that our people, we are selling our people and this and that, that's a lie. If people that have come out of our land are still this rebellious, are still fighting for their freedom outside our land, imagine what the type of resistance that was going on in our land. Can you imagine the type of resistance that was going on in Biafra land or in Africa during that slave period? That will tell you that our people were resisting that slave going to slavery. They were. Because even though the European slave owners coming were lying to them, they were lying to them that their place is very good, that they are coming there to enjoy, not knowing that they are going there to suffer. For these people to say they have left Biafra land into America and they've been transported from Savannah, Georgia to their destination, they say instead of them to go to be slaves, let them die. How about you? What are you learning from this? You are in foreign land, whether you are in Abuja, whether you are in Lagos, whether you are in Europe or America or Middle East. You are in foreign land. You are not in your land. You don't control your resources. You don't have a boundary. You don't have your own country. And it's okay with you. All of us are still slaves unknowingly. We are slaves without knowing it, unless we secure our land, we come together, secure our land, have our own country, and use our resources to develop ourselves. There's a big lesson to be learned in this lecture. That's why we want you to please like, comment, and share. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Share it so that many people will get it. Because here we digest and analyze and give you clue. Think outside the box. Tell you the truth for you to know. Let's go to listen to him.
It's carved into folklore. The story became known as the myth of the flying Africans, the belief that the souls of those who drowned did not die at all, but flew back across the ocean, back to Africa, back to freedom, because death was preferable to enslavement, and because a soul that chooses its own ending cannot be owned by anyone. For descendants of the enslaved along the Georgia and Carolina coast, this was not a horror story to be buried. It was a story to be protected, retold, sung, and eventually sanctified.
Death was better for those slaves than going to life enslavement. They choose death because they believe that death is better than going to be enslaved. What is your mindset today? I was talking to somebody, in America somewhere, and he told me, no, he's not a slave. I say, why? He said, because he owns a house, he gets up in the morning, he goes to work, he has a car, all those things in foreign land. That's the mentality of our people. Let's continue to watch.
And here is where the past reaches directly into the present, closer than most people realize. Igbo landing did not stay confined to oral history and regional folklore. It surfaced in the love drought sequence, where Black women walk together into open water in a sequence that critics and historians alike have connected directly back to Dunbar Creek. A moment of mass resistance from 1803 involving a specific West African ethnic group is still shaping mainstream American pop culture in the 21st century. That is not a dead history. That is a live wire. So why isn't this common knowledge? Why does the 60% figure not appear in classrooms? Part of the answer is structural. The same reason so much of African-American genealogical history stayed buried for so long.
This happened in Dunbar Creek, in a river that they are being transported from Savannah, Georgia, to their destination to be slaves. They chose death instead of being slaves. And when we are fighting for Biafran restoration and you are choosing distance, you are choosing to be running away, you are choosing to be I don't care, which means you have accepted to be a slave, which is not what we are. That's not whom we are. We've been fighting injustice. We've been fighting slavery. We've been fighting, so many atrocities. Igbos speak up. Igbos don't look at things that are bad and keep quiet. How about you? Why can't you stand with the truth that the restoration of Biafra is the only thing that can save you and I from being slaves, from being whom we are, from having respect, from being proud of ourselves? When and how else will you know? Let's continue to watch him.
Enslavers stripped names on arrival. They renamed people, broke apart families, and destroyed the paper trails that could have preserved ethnic origin. For most of American history, tracing a specific African ethnicity for a specific family was treated as functionally impossible. The prevailing assumption, reinforced for generations, was that this information was gone, permanently. And that assumption became its own kind of quiet erasure, not just of names, but of the idea that reconnection was even possible. But that assumption is now being dismantled in real time. And this is where the story escalates again. Commercial DNA testing has done something historians spent 2 centuries unable to do at scale. It has started handing back specific answers to specific families. Companies like 23andMe launched dedicated African ancestry projects, specifically to expand the reference populations available.
Because the slave owners and ship owners, they hide the information. They hide the origin of the slaves, where the slaves come from. They were hiding it. But now DNA testing, it was DNA revolution. It is advancement in DNA technology that revealed these secrets, that the majority of Igbo slaves that was brought in from Bight of Biafra into West Virginia, and in fact, that 60% of all Black Americans are Igbos. that 60% of all black Americans have Igbo DNA, which means they are Igbos. It is DNA advancement that is revealing this now. That's what we want you to know. Let's continue to watch him.
For African-American customers, adding data from Nigeria and other West African nations so that a person spitting into a tube in Atlanta or Chicago could, for the first time, see a country, sometimes even an ethnic group attached to a fragment of their own genome. Ancestry DNA has reported tens of millions of DNA samples now in its database, with over 1 trillion genetic matches connected in a single recent year alone. What used to be an unanswerable question is now, for a rapidly growing number of families, something you can literally receive in an email. But, and this is the twist most people don't see coming, the answers are messier and stranger than the marketing promises. Some families discover a large, confident Nigerian percentage on their first test, only to watch that number shift dramatically when the company updates its reference panels a year later, reallocating what used to read as Nigeria into more specific or more Bantu-linked categories. Genetic ancestry is not a fixed photograph. It is closer to a moving negotiation between imperfect reference databases and the messy, mixed, migratory reality of real human history.
What he's saying here is that the advancement in DNA technology now have shown that before, if a Black American or all those our brothers and sisters brought, through slavery, went to do tests, they will tell them that they are from Nigeria. But now it is now specific. It is now specific to ethnic group, and that ethnic group is Igbo. That's what the DNA technology have revealed. Let's continue to watch him.
Genome-wide studies of African-American ancestry have found people who identify as African-American ranging from as little as 1% West African ancestry to as much as 99%, with a median European ancestry contribution sitting around 18 to 20%, the genetic residue of centuries of forced and coerced mixing under slavery. The story DNA tells is real, but it is not simple, and it does not arrive the way a viral headline wants it to. This is where the deeper, harder truth sits, and it is worth saying plainly instead of dressing it up. Some corners of the internet have taken the genuine, documented Igbo-American connection and pushed it somewhere the evidence does not go, toward claims that Igbo genetics trace back to a lost tribe of Israel, that DNA has proven an ancient Hebrew bloodline running through southeastern Nigeria and into Black America. This belief is real, and it matters to the people who hold it. It has deep roots inside Igbo cultural and religious identity, part of a long tradition of oral history claiming Israelite descent through figures like Eri and Gad. But it is worth being honest here. Mainstream population genetics does not support it as an established scientific finding, and Nigerian scholars themselves have pushed back hard against the idea, with historians on the ground calling the genetic version of the claim exactly what it is.
What he's saying here again is something that our people have been saying, that some Igbos came from Israel. Okay, that's what he's saying here. But a lot of Igbo, scientists also have been saying that it is not true, because there's this information out there that some Igbo section, some section of the Igbo came from Israel. Okay, some people are saying that some people that are Igbo today, some of them came from Israel, but some other people are saying that is not true. But from what I'm saying, from the Umueri kingdom, not Umueri, Eri kingdom, that is the kingdom. Then the kingdom always say that they are from Israel. Okay, so there could be truth to that some people from Israel made up the Igbo ethnic group. So let's continue to listen to him.
Is unsupported. The real story does not need that embellishment. The real story is bigger and stranger and true, because the true legacy is not a mythical bloodline stretching back to the ancient Near East. It is something more immediate and more American than that. It is the fact that a specific West African people, funneled by the tens of thousands into a specific American colony in numbers large enough to reshape its culture from the inside out, went on to become, quietly, structurally, without acknowledgement, one of the primary genetic and cultural foundations of Black America itself. It is the fact that a word for a vegetable, a rhythm in a parade, a funeral custom, a reputation for defiance, and a 2-century-old myth about souls flying home over open water are not separate curiosities. They are pieces of the same buried architecture, still holding up a culture that never got to see its own blueprint. And here's the part that should unsettle anyone who thought this was simply a closed chapter of history. The story is still moving. Genealogists and DNA researchers are still refining these estimates. Pilgrimages are still made to Dunbar Creek, where descendants in diaspora communities from Nigeria, Haiti, and Belize continue to gather, pour water, sing, and mark ground that official American history rarely mentions. New documentaries are still being released, still being watched, still reopening a wound and a reclamation at the same time. Families are still opening DNA reports and discovering, for the first time in their lives, a name for a piece of themselves they were told did not exist. So the real question is not whether the Igbo shaped America. The evidence for that is no longer seriously contested by the historians who have spent careers reconstructing it. The real question is what happens next, as reference databases keep improving, as more descendants test their DNA, as more archival records get digitized and cross-referenced against slave ship manifests that once seemed permanently silent. How many more of these buried demographic truths are sitting in plantation ledgers and Bight of Biafra shipping records, waiting for some?
What he's saying is that, now it is clearer that 60% of all the slaves brought from Bight of Biafra into West Virginia, into America, are Igbos. And the Igbo culture is there. The Igbo culture is all over the place. In their dressing, in their spirituality, in their food, okra, in other cultures, other Igbo cultures, So what we have tried to show you here today is that the Igbo had civilization. We had been living our life before the colonial masters came to our land. And we gave you an example of the culture of the Igbo people. Your culture is the totality of your way of life. Your food, your dress, the way you dance, your music, and everything that you're doing, your spirituality. It is your way of life that is your culture. We have our culture, have our democracy, our Republican democracy, even before the white man opened their eyes. We have an Igbo representative democracy. Villages bring people, appoint people, select people to represent them, not by election, by whom you are, And we also have the Ibuhu, bronze casting, which have dated 9th to 10th century CE, and also the Nsude pyramid. So the Igbo have civilization. We are living a happy life before the Papa Bull, where the Catholic Church, in fact, Pope Alexander VI gave the leader of Portugal, Alphonsus of Portugal, on May 4th, 1493, granted him papal bull to go and start to colonize, take lands, kill, vanquish people who doesn't, worship Christian. That's who doesn't worship Christ. That is where colonialism started. This transatlantic slave trade started, and it ran between 1400 to 1888 for almost 488 years. That's when people were brought from all over Africa, mainly Igbo people, to work for the Europeans for almost 500 years. People giving you free labor for more than 500 years. You were buying them as much as goods and services. That is why they became rich. So as a black man, this is the source of the European wealth. Our people that was brought in, they sold them, make money from them, and they were producing things for them. They were working in their plantations, they were working in their railways, they were working in their companies, they were doing everything for them for free for almost 500 years. That's what happened to you. And because of that, a lot of Igbos are in Virginia, and they have a farm dedicated to that Igbo slaves that were brought to Virginia. Many of them were brought to Virginia, and the Igbo had been very, very rebellious in that Virginia. They killed ex-president of United States, Madison. They find a poison and kill him because about 600 slaves were working for him. And out of that 600 slaves, 500 may be Igbo. So they poisoned the man, and all the slaves working for him got freed. And so many other slaves in Virginia, West Virginia, and even South Carolina, they got free. Their owners, let them go because they were afraid of the slaves. The Igbos have been rebellion. We have been rebellious and have been resistance. We've been resisting. We know how to resist. We know how to say no. That was why even those slaves being carried from Savannah, Georgia to their destination, they say no, they cannot go into slavery. Instead, let them die. And they jump into the water and died. And after slavery ended, the Europeans started this colonization. Colonization is when they come physically to Africa now, to set up governments. That's why we have colonial structured government in our land now, introduce their way of life, impose their culture on our people, their religion, their education, their dressing, their banking, everything about their culture, they impose it on our people. And after 1960, when they gave us flag independence, they started neocolonialism. Neocolonialism is now they have our people dancing to their tune, imposing their culture on our people. That is neocolonialism. That's what we have up till now. So most of the people we have in Africa are indirectly working for them. Okay, so you can see about you have learned about the resistance of our people, and we went forward to tell you what is happening in Haiti. Haiti is 90% Igbo people. The population of Haiti is 90% Igbo people. And they are the second country after US had their independence. They are the second country to have their independence. But because they did that, and because they know whom they are, that they are Igbos, that's why you see what is happening in Haiti today happening. They continue to resist them. The colonial forces continue to suppress, and punish the Igbo people that own the land of Haiti, And even in the United States, a lot of resistance is going on in the Black population because majority of them are Igbos. We want you to know that. And then also remember the Igbo resistance, they could make warriors. They fought the British for almost 30 years before they were subdued in our land. And South Africa also fought for 100 years, more than 100 years before they were subdued by the Europeans. So the Igbo resistance has been there, and we're asking you, what are you doing today? You as an Igbo man, you don't have your own country, you don't have control your resources, you are just scavenging all over the globe. And I was asking one guy, do you know that you are a slave in America? He said, no, he's not a slave. I asked him why. He said that because he owns a house, he's driving a car, he has a job, he's this and he's that. In somebody else's land, not in your own land. You don't have no identity. When UN gathers, you are not there. The World Cup that just ended, no Igbo country was represented. And you're not ashamed of that. Having known that our people have been resisting and have been rebellious on this slavery and colonization and others. And you are sitting there. That is wrong. And we are asking you today to unite with our brothers all over the world. Unite with the people in America. Stop running away from them. They are our brothers. They are our sisters. Those making you to hate them are trying to divide us so that we can never be free. So we have to unite our people in Haiti, in Brazil, in America, in Europe, wherever you are, come together. Know that we are one people so that we can be free from the colonial shackles with which they are holding us down. And with this, we shall bring in today's presentation to an end. If you like what you heard in this lecture, please like, comment, and share. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you'll be glad that you did by pressing the bell button. Thank you, and have a good day. Bye-bye.